Kindred Church, nice to see you. I'm so glad you're in this place tonight with us. I am Zach. If I haven't met you, I'd love to meet you tonight. I want to start off with this. Lindsay's address is, no. How great is it to hear that Lindsay was 10 years old on 9/11? I was in grad school, so that makes me feel great. Hey, we are in week 5 of our Genesis study. We have been going right through each story in Genesis, and I am really excited about the verses I got tonight. People have told me that when I'm excited, I talk really fast, and I'm trying to be aware of that, and I'm going to try to slow down just a little bit tonight. But we get tonight one of my favorite stories, really in all the Bible, but definitely my favorite story in Genesis. We're going to explore tonight in just 4 verses. We're going to look at some of what I think are the biggest topics really in life, which are these: risk, faith, and trust. And really what we're going to do is we're going to try to look at what each one of those, how each one of those things plays into every single thing that we do, every single motivation that we have, and both good and bad decisions. And so to do this, we're going to find ourselves in the middle of really an adventure story, a story that we really have to dissect to grasp just the complexity, the stakes of this story. But it's a story that a lot of us know. It's a story of a great patriarch, his family, and a decision that he and really they made that I think affects every single one of us who follows Jesus thousands of years later. So the greatest adventure stories always start really with a choice, this crossroads, this moment for the protagonist where they have to decide where they want to go. And I think for all of us, of course, that's a familiar concept as well. Life is really a series of choices and decisions. It's the choice of leaving things as they started the way that they were when we woke up today, or pushing the boundaries of everything that we know and everything that we do in order to go after something that we think might be better. Now, I've shared this before, but one of my favorite adages, and there's different ways to say it, but I like it like this, is this: when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of changing, it's time for that change, right? And there's risk in this. There's risk in going after something because we don't know what it's going to be. And advancing towards something new or staying where we are both hold risk. There's different risks on both sides of that. And often I think I get stuck and we get stuck because we think that maybe the risk seems too great and we don't know what lies on the other side of it. And sometimes after we go for it and we just go ahead and make that change and go after that thing, we find out that there's really good life to be lived on the other side of that decision. And we go, man, that was probably ultimately worth it. I've applied that idea of pain becoming too great to stay the same to friendships, to relationships, to houses, to jobs, to the football team that I unfortunately cheer for every single year. Like, I've tried to ditch them several times and I can't. And all of you have done that as well. You've applied that over and over again, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, and I think we do it both ways. We also see this same exact idea in every single story that we see out there, whether it's a great book or a movie that we really love. Pretty much every single story, every single good movie needs this element of a crossroads, a decision to be made, something that has to change to even grab our attention. So there's famous movies like Lord of the Rings, right, where this little hairy-footed dude has to follow this creepy wizard into the unknown to save the world, right? Or a very popular series, Harry Potter, where he follows the same exact creepy wizard, which I still try to get my head around, and he has to go to this magic school to save the world, right? Or the cinematic classic, it won 37 Oscars, don't look that up, Dumb and Dumber. They have to decide that they want a new life, right? This life where maybe their pets' heads won't fall off anymore, right? This life where things can be better. But they had a choice along the way to pursue a better life, to go after the possibility that things could be better, and it lands them in a little place called Aspen, and everything is okay at the end of that one. So at this pivotal moment in any good story, a decision has to be made, and a system of belief has to guide those choices that they make and that we make. So tonight we get this familiar story to most of us, but one that the Bible literally tells us informs the way that every single living person in history relates to the Creator God that we see in Genesis. And it started with one family's choice to pursue something that might have seemed foolish not only to themselves, but really to every single person around them. So We pick up here, if you use the Bible app or if you have a Bible with you, we're in Genesis 12 tonight. So Lindsay left off in Genesis 10. Chapter 11 is another genealogy. And a genealogy is just really where the Bible fills us in on who came along, who had what kids, and how the lines went so that we can kind of see how history unfolds. And we have a lot to learn from it, but it doesn't make a great sermon. So I'm skipping chapter 11. And in chapter 12, we learned a few things from that genealogy. There's a man named Terah. He had a kid named Abram. Abram married a woman named Sarai, and also Terah had this grandson, Lot, who's Abram's nephew. And these are important characters in the stories that we're going to see for the next few weeks. Here's what's going on. The first 11 chapters of Genesis, the stories that we've gone through, are the background. It's all like some of the most familiar and famous stories, creation and Noah and this Tower of Babel that we looked at last week. But they really are giving us background for the rest of the Bible. Chapter 12 is this pivotal turning point where we start to see that God is up to something different in the Bible. He's making an identity for his people. They're going to call it tonight in our text, it's going to be called a great nation. And really we know later that this nation is literally Israel itself. And what God is doing is that he's choosing his chosen people who will bless all people to come afterwards. See, he's choosing this line, and he chooses it through the specific man and the specific family that we're going to look at tonight. So he in the next weeks of this study, we're going to see that God continues to form people and culture and the way the world works through people like Abram, who we look at tonight, and other people like him. So chapter 12 is this. It's called the call of Abram, and it starts like this. The Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land that I will show you." Another translation says, "Go from your country and your kindred." That's one of the reasons we named this church that, is because it's about these tight bonds that Abram had and that he lived in, and God says to him, leave them. So we meet him in this monumental moment, right? This moment where he has to choose everything. And it's not only monumental in his life, but like I just said, I believe in all of human history. Because and maybe that sounds hyperbolic, but what we see here is this. He's called out, he's given this commissioning to change the entire way that God relates to people. He's called out and given this idea that the Creator God has chosen him to lead. And in a specific order, he's called him to lead like this. First, his own family and himself, and eventually he's going to lead the entirety of these people that belong to God, that are called God's chosen people. He's obviously a very important person, right? He's somebody in the Bible that we see a lot of history hinge on. And he's one of my favorite biblical characters for sure. And the reasons that you'll see tonight are the reasons why I have spent most of my life trying to figure out how he leads, how he lives, and how I can be more like him. I did this thing with naming my kids. And if you're a parent in this room, you probably know this familiar story. You're expecting your first kid, and maybe one of you has an idea of what the name's going to be already, and the other one doesn't think it's a great name. Anybody have that one? No, just me? So Josie won the first, I'm going to call it discussion about what the name of our first kid would be. But in that discussion that I lost, I got the right to give middle names to our kids. And so I wanted to name our first kid Moses, because Moses is just a cool name. And so I got to name our first kid's middle name Moses. There's a reason for it. I picked for all three of my kids names that meant something to me, and specifically Old Testament people that I wanted to make a prayer for their life. So Moses is my oldest kid's middle name, and the prayer for Zane is this, that Zane would be a humble and strong leader. And then for my daughter Emerson, her middle name is Ruth. It's my grandma's name, but it's more than that. My prayer for Emmy is that she would be fierce and faithful, right? And Abram is the name of my third kid, his middle name. And my prayer for Smith is really this. And here's what we're going to explore tonight. My prayer is that he would be sacrificially full of hope and trust. Abram, who we're going to read the story of tonight, is sacrificially full of hope and trust. So this narrative obviously is much larger than my kids' middle names. From this point, the entire Jewish faith develops from Abram and his line. And not only that, but the two other big faiths, the one that we follow, Christianity and Islam, both develop off of this story of Abram. All three faiths believe this story happened and have different things they teach off of it. So there are some major differences. They've led to things like wars and so much more, but they all start in this moment where Abram receives a command that's as simple as this: go, just leave. And as human beings, I know this, you know this, that in all matters of life when we're told to do something, whether we feel like we should do that or shouldn't do that, or maybe it's just a request, we always have a choice. right? And this has been the story of Genesis through the first 11 chapters. Adam and Eve had a choice. They made a bad one. Noah had a choice. He made a pretty good one, right? Last week, the people that were building the Tower of Babel, they had a choice, and they made a pretty bad one. So sometimes I choose to follow what I know is right, and sometimes I choose to go my own way, right? And to add further complexity to that idea, sometimes when somebody tells me to do something, they're wrong, and my better decision pays off. And sometimes I'm wrong, and I really regret that I went that way. So Abram, he's in the same spot as everybody that we've seen so far. And in this case, Abram isn't wired like me, thank God, right, for all civilization. Abram chooses to respond this way, really with this incredible act of obedience to this kind of abstract idea from a God that he couldn't see, and a God that we know as we study, he probably had never interacted with before, and probably his family didn't know. There's a lot of reasons to believe that Abram's family would have been worshiping multiple gods in this old world that they lived in, and that they kind of were throwing darts at the idea of blessing and hoping that they found the right God at the right time. And then this booming voice comes out and tells him, leave all you know and go. And this isn't a light request, right? And those, it's easy and quick to read and just go right past. There's only 4 verses that we're looking at tonight. God is asking Abram to blindly follow something huge with really little guarantee. And the request that he's making is take everything that you own, pack it up, and leave. But the request also has promises tied to it, which helps us see some richness to this that makes us understand why Abram maybe could make that really good decision. So he says this, if you do leave, if you leave your kith and your kindred on faith, and you go to a place that I haven't even named yet or told you where it is, here's what he says I'll do for you. He says, Abram, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So this scene, like if we really picture in real life what this scene looks like, we see Abram, who to this point is unfamiliar with a God whose voice comes out of nowhere and makes him promises that some really amazing things can happen for him if he's obedient. And they're pretty great things. It's a pretty great job offer. You're going to be a nation builder. The entire line of the world will follow after you. He's basically being said, you'll have fame, but you'll also have integrity. You will bless people, and your mission will be to bless them and to make their lives better. And he says this, anyone who stands in your way, anybody who speaks against you will be cursed by me, the booming voice, the creator of the entire universe. I think that's a pretty easy thing to sign up for, right? We probably have a list ready, and it's maybe the Dodgers roster and a few other people. But not least of all, Abram stands in this place where all of the promises that he had received was that his descendants would be numerous. It would be a nation that follows him. And what I haven't told you yet is that Abram and Sarai are in their 70s. They've been waiting their entire life to have children. And they're in this spot now where they probably think that time is over, maybe, and then some. And this promise comes that the entire line of the world will follow them. We have to keep this in mind. No matter how good those promises were, what he's trying to do here and what he's following isn't easy. You can promise me the best things in the world. Doing the actual act of leaving and going to an unnamed place was not easy. Travel itself was not easy. There's no roads as we know them. There's no maps to consult. There's no Siri. You have to leave your comfort and everything that you know and go somewhere unnamed. It's kind of like the feeling, the closest thing I have is packing my bags to leave my parents' house to go to college, right? Where I'm terrified and excited and I'm hopeful that better things are around the corner. I got to Greeley, and that's a different story for a different day. So Abram's response to the call is this in verse 4. It says this, so Abram went as the Lord had told him. And that's it. Abram went just as he had been told. He went and did the thing. He went. He goes. He picks it all up. He takes his wife and his nephew, and they head out into this unknown world. They're armed with a couple pretty incredible promises and little else. Except one really important thing, trust. And that's what I want to talk about tonight. They're armed with trust, and even more specifically, trust in this God, this voice that they had heard, a voice that Abram followed, that he picked out as trusting that it's right and good, and he followed it. That he's navigating something that every single one of us has to, and every single one of us does, which is this. We come to a point where we know we're supposed to do something, and even when it has uncertain results, we're not really sure which way it's going to go. We have to choose, are we going to choose comfortability or conviction? Abram chooses conviction over his own comfort. And sometimes we end up in these places because we can't support something that we're in and we have to get away from it. And sometimes we have to get away from a person who's toxic, and sometimes we don't know why we're going or what we're doing, but I know a lot of people with that story. I knew it was time to go, and I picked up and I went because the pain of staying the same was greater than the pain of changing. But every single time a decision like this is made, and every single time we go after something bigger, it always involves fear. Fear of leaving that job or that person or that social situation, really anything. This is really the fear. What if I can't do better? And I know you've been there. Or what if I'm flat out wrong? And what if it's even worse? And it turns out to be way worse than anything I could have imagined that I'm holding on to now and living in. At least I know this pain, right? But more often than not, what I think we actually find is that making that change, even if it takes a bit to find it out, it's usually exactly the spark that's needed for our growth. Even when we make one that maybe wasn't the best, we grow from it. We change from it. And sometimes the rest of our life finds traction in those decisions that are scary, but they're taken with trust. And taking the first step of faith is the hardest part of every single one of those journeys. Abram himself, he trusted that this voice that he heard was a creator God that was guiding him, that the voice was trustworthy, and that where it led him would be better for him, would be better for his family, and would be better than where he currently was. But here's what I want to talk about too. Trust is a really tricky thing, right? I mean, it's easy to kind of surmise that Abram lived with great faith. He had faith that in of itself is this complex concept, and although it can be talked about really simply, faith is a really complex thing. The truth is, the more we explore it, the more rich it becomes. In theological terms, and I'm going to go in some weeds here with you for just like 1 second, defining faith is really a big deal. It's a big thing. And there's at least a threefold thought of faith in academic circles, and it's this. Faith is this, and they build on each other. One, it's recognition of certain facts about God, the world, and ourselves. And then two, it builds to this, the confession of the truth of those facts and that they are authoritative. And then three, it builds to this, existentially trusting ourselves to the promises and claims of the God that we find in them. That's faith defined by academics. Faith defined by the Bible is more simple and intersects really well. This is from Hebrews 11:1. It says this, confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. We have hope in we have confidence in what we hope for and assurance in what we do not see. See, this definition of faith really unlocks a specific word that I think nails what Abram was operating on and that we can aspire to. It's the word hope. And one of my spiritual heroes, he puts it like this. He says that faith plus hope equals trust. And the quote is this. He says, somewhere along the way in the life of the maturing Christian, faith combined with hope turns into trust. It turns into it. Trust comes into play when certainty isn't an option. Hope comes into play when the other options don't work. And they work together really, really well. Mother Teresa said it like this. She said, I have never had clarity. What I've always had is trust. Mother Teresa's pretty cool. She's a little more spiritual than I am. I think that's a difficult teaching. It's a pretty incredible thing for me to get my head around. She says, I've never been sure. I've always just trusted. It's really always just trusted. So no matter like where that lands on you, I want to invite you to do something with me tonight. I want to ask you to look into your own life and your own story. And just in the silence of your own heart right now, I want you to answer this honestly for yourself. How many people in your life would you say without any what ifs you fully trust? How many? Is it one? Is it a couple? And then I want you to ask this converse question. How many times have you counted on a person or people and it turns out that out of this instinct that you had, that you were wrong and it went horribly awry and you were left picking up the pieces? I'm guessing, because for me, that second number is larger than the first. It's a difficult thing for us to trust that way and to have it turn out well. The truth is this, every single follower of Jesus is challenged to live in that kind of risky trust with God, to ask God to be that kind of pole that we lean on, being confident that it will hold us. It's not just for missionaries or the really good people, wherever that might look like. But here's what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that trusting and having our hope in God, it doesn't mean that we're called to do the exact same thing that Abram is. I've heard people before that they try to apply stories as like a prescription to them and say, that means I have to leave it all, I have to drop it all right now, and I have to get away from the entire world. You don't have to camp in a tent for 75 years, hoping and laying on the ground and hoping and waiting for the next prophetic word from God. Here's the truth. You just have to be willing to. And that's hard. You just have to be willing to do that. It's a lot by itself to say that. Abram's real crowning achievement to me, it might have been this. He was willing to give up everything. In that trust and that faith, he was willing to abandon every good thing in his life to fulfill the call of that creator, that voice that he trusted, and he meant it. He meant it. I've been asking myself all week reading this story over and over again, what makes somebody react that way, like so obediently to this abstract idea? And there's probably multiple answers to it, but I want to present my favorite explanation from this week. Abram, who later becomes Abraham, has this understanding of his right relationship with God that's fueled by his ability to follow. See, the book of Hebrews talks about Abraham and others this way. It says this, by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. So what we're being taught here is this. The people of God, the people who belong to him, are people that are naturally willing to be risky to follow after his voice. And here's what else we know. It's not a natural way to live. And I would say that the place that we're in, the times that we live in right now, maybe we already know that, right? This last couple of years has brought so much peril and so much strife and so much arguing into our lives. So many contentious relationships, right? I was just talking about this with my friend. Jump on Nextdoor if you don't believe me and see how crazy it can get. This has been a really hard time. But what the Hebrews writer is setting up here is this. Abram and Sarai, they've been wanting kids their entire life into their 70s, like I said. I imagine they're frustrated and discouraged. Their hope is waning at certain moments. And into this moment, Abraham receives this promise that he'll be the father of the nation called Israel. The father that we know through kids' songs, right? Like I went to church a couple times growing up. It's one of the things I remember, right? It had to be a key to his devotion and his willingness to move on this call, this voice. It was fueled by a specific hope. That their line of descendants, which starts with their kid Isaac and it moves all the way down the line, would follow for generations all the way to us. Like the song says, I'm one of them and so are you, right? It's all the way to us. And then it says this, they were, and we still are, as strangers in a foreign country. And while initially that's just a literal thing for them, it becomes so much more than that. Because look what the writer says next in Hebrews. It says, all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. And they admitted that they were aliens and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they've been thinking of the country they had left, they have had the opportunity to return. Instead, they're looking for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he's prepared a city for them. God is not ashamed to be called their God. Therefore, meaning he's saying because of that fact, that people of faith feel like they're out of place in any system that's not fueled by faith, God is not ashamed to be called their God. Saying this, those who set their eyes on things to come, those who set their eyes on the kingdom of heaven and not an earthly one, those who live by faith, even if they never experience promises that God gave them while they're alive, even if that doesn't happen, this passage tells us that God is proud to call them his people. And that when we desire his kingdom over everything else, that those that belong to him have a city awaiting them in the afterlife. And it's really saying this. It's signaling that the best is yet to come for his people. That the suffering on earth, the bad decisions, the stuff that's done to us and the stuff that we do, that it goes away and that this payoff is amazing. This kind of extremely challenging life on multiple fronts that we're called to live is worth it. It has implications for us while we're on earth. It means that our devotion to people and politics and the people that we choose to call our leaders and follow, that those things matter, right? That everything matters, that everything that we can only begin to understand has meaning. And it means that a reordering of our lives has to take place in order to follow after this kingdom that's not of this world. To be strangers as in a foreign land, it means this big word, repentance. It means going to the places that we've turned away from God and purposely turning back towards him. saying that I've come up with my own ideas, I have my own fear, I have my own insecurity, but instead of holding on to those things, I'm going to listen for the voice of God, because the sheep knows the voice of their shepherd. And really what it looks like is this. We take a physical shift, we take a mental shift, and we turn as citizens of the kingdom of heaven back towards God. We surrender to who Jesus is, not to who I want him to be. And it's that faith plus hope that equals trust, right? We live in crazy times. Next door, Facebook, the real enemy, will tell you what's really going on. But as a follower of Jesus, my allegiance is to his kingdom first, which means that sometimes we have to put aside things that I believe in and things that I hold on to that aren't things that are his, in order to pursue a partnership with God and this project that he's been up to since the very beginning of the Bible. As we see in every single one of these stories, every story in the Old Testament, every story in Genesis just screams the name of Jesus, the only one who's actually able to save anybody from anything. God's in the middle of this project of redeeming the entire human race through the work of Jesus and Jesus alone. It's really a big calling that if you're a follower of Jesus in this room that we've been given. And the calling is this, is asking myself this question over and over again. Who do I really trust, and why am I so easily full of fear and turn away, right? I was thinking about this all weekend, and I got a phone call from one of my friends like on Saturday or something, and I'm not a phone call person, so I put it to voicemail. But then I called him back because his voicemail was really good. Here's what he told me. He told me that his brother had gone missing, and he'd been gone for about 5 days, and they had just found him. And so he's in this spot where he's relieved, and he's still scared, and he's taking deep breaths. But 5 days is a really long time, if you just imagine missing somebody for that long, having no idea where they are. They found him in the wilderness. He was badly hurt, but he was okay, right? He was confused. He didn't know how he got there, but he was going to make it, and they knew that by this point. And when my friend told me on the phone about how he was and what he was thinking while I was waiting for that news, it's really good. I got my pen out. I literally wrote it down word for word, and this is what he said to me. He said, the human heart, he said, my heart jumps to fear so quickly and so easily. He said, when I say that I trust God and I wait to see what happens, he always blows me away with something that I could never have prepared for. And then he said this, my trust is more powerful than my fear or my efforts. I think that's so good. That's the Abram story playing itself out again today in real life with real people. So the question I want to ask us in this room tonight as we take this story, the story of faith and hope and trust, is I want to ask you, in whatever place you are, and maybe in that couple seconds when you thought about who you really trust, you discovered not that many people, or you thought about some of the ways that we have trouble trusting God sometimes. I want to challenge you, what's one step, just one thing you can do towards trusting God a little bit more? Or what's one step you can take towards risk to get yourself into a spot where you have to rely on him? The biggest question I have for us tonight is this. What voice are we listening to? Are we truly seeking out his voice, or am I again and again putting my own narrative and my own voice in and hoping it's going to be louder? Or maybe this. Maybe you can just set a reminder on your phone for when you wake up tomorrow that you're going to wake up and remember that real hope is found in Jesus and only Jesus. And no amount of effort and no amount of right thinking is going to get you there. It's only Jesus that can get you there. And he asks us this. He asks us into this wild adventure on this planet in this lifetime as strangers, as aliens on earth. Sometimes it's blindly to go where he says, but here's the deal. He always goes with us. He's always right beside us. Trusting in Jesus' goodness is always more powerful than fear or human effort. Let's pray. God, I'm so thankful tonight for this story of Abram, for who he is, for the things that he did, the decisions he made. And God, I thank you for the way that he led his family into this initial trust, this blind faith and trust, this hope. And God, I pray tonight for us, thousands of years later, as your people, as we sit in the place in our lives, whether our life's going really well or it's really difficult, I thank you that we have this model to look after, that we don't belong here, we belong with you, that we have our eyes set on something better that ultimately we will receive. But God, in the meantime, we're in this space where we hope and trust. We have faith in who you are and where you're taking us. I pray tonight that no matter what we're going through, no matter what we're pushing through, no matter what's happened in the past that we regret or that we're proud of, God, that we would turn our eyes to your voice, that we would listen to what you have next for us, and whether you lay it all out or you say just go, that we be the kind of people willing to risk it all and take that step. We love you, and we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.